All right, Alexander, let's do a video and talk about the German energy crisis and what is going on in Germany. And when you talk about Germany, you have to talk about the European Union as well. It's hard to separate the two. But okay, we've got the Nord Stream. We've got the Nord Stream sabotage. Obviously, that's been the big story with regards to the German energy crisis and the economy and all of that. Incidentally, the Russians are now saying that they can fix it. Yeah. I think that's an interesting play. I think it's a very smart move by the Russians to say we can fix it. How many times have you heard of someone sabotaging something and then saying, "Well, I'll come around and fix it"? I think it's a very smart move by the Russians, and it throws the ball in Germany's court, in the collective West's court. But anyway, aside from that, what is the situation in Germany? It's not good at all, obviously, but give the details.
It's not good at all, and you're beginning to get the sense, the first real indicators of actual panic beginning to settle in. I mean, September in Northwest Europe, for those who don't know, has been absolutely normal. It's been an absolutely normal September, which is to say that it's been colder than it was in the summer. Now, last year, September was actually quite warm. So Germany saved energy over the course of September. And there seem to have been a lot of people in Germany who thought the same thing would happen this time, except, of course, it hasn't. It's been colder. And the result is that German energy use over the course of September has been around 15% higher than it was last year. Now, what we have is the German regulator coming along and saying, well, no, this is going all in the wrong direction. We shouldn't be increasing our use of energy because we're so short of energy, as we don't have Russian gas, and we may soon find that we don't have Russian oil either. What we should be doing instead is we need to reduce energy by 20%. So instead of reducing it by 20%, it's rising by 15%. As winter settles in. Now, anybody who has any understanding both of human psychology and of industrial processes knows that this is inevitable. If people begin to get cold, they will switch on their central heating. They will try to keep their homes warm. They're not, whatever they may say in opinion polls, they're not going to start taking cold showers in the middle of a cold day. They're not going to keep their homes, their families cold in the middle of a cold day whilst they can. And of course, the German government is helping people with fuel bills. So the price mechanism to reduce energy consumption isn't activating either. It's not encouraging people to save energy because it is so expensive. At the same time, if you're talking about the really big energy users, the German industrial companies, they have no choice but to save, rather to use energy. If it was that easy to cut energy consumption by 20%, well, they'd have done it anyway, because from their point of view, that's an efficiency saving. It's reducing a cost, and that's what they would have done. So energy consumption in Germany is rising. They are running short of fuel. Now, they were hoping that they would have enough gas to get them through the winter because they pumped up the underground gas reserves to the absolute brim, or so they thought. It turns out the underground gas reserves don't work like that. And they're going to, before very long, going to have to start drawing heavily on those underground gas reserves. It's beginning to look as if instead of February, when they thought that the real problems with energy were going to really start to hit in Germany, it could be as soon as the end of the year. And that is already causing something of a panic. Now, they've been looking for alternatives. The German government is now selling arms to Saudi Arabia to get oil. Trouble is, the Saudis do provide oil. The German government up to now had always said it would not provide arms to Saudi Arabia. So the reverse policy on that. Saudis will provide them with oil. Saudis, of course, are in the process of agreeing a major oil production cut. And that's a whole story by itself. So the Saudis are, but they will provide oil. Of course, the oil that they're going to provide Germany is much lighter than Russian crude. So what it's forcing the Germans at the moment to do, or at least the Europeans to do, is increase their purchases of diesel oil from Russia, which they have no obvious replacement for, because the lighter Saudi crude is not as easily convertible into diesel as the heavier Russian crude is. And if you know anything about Germany, you will know that lots and lots of people in Germany use diesel for their cars. So and of course, German trucks and, not just European, the European truck industry depends on diesel. So one way or the other, they're looking in a very, very poor place. And again, one gets the sense that they don't really know what to do. At the moment, all that they can think of doing is throwing money at the problem.
Right. Why do you get conflicting reports saying that? I was reading one today. I forgot the publication, but the respectable Collective West publication. It said that Germany is going to make it this winter.
Yeah.
They have enough gas. 50% of the gas consumption. The public is going to decrease their gas consumption by 50%, but Germany is going to be A-okay this year.
Yes.
Why are you getting these different reports?
Well, of course, because many people look at the same thing and they look at this in different ways. That particular report, which I think I have actually seen, makes assumptions about Germany reducing its energy use over the course of this winter by comparison with last winter. Last winter in Northwest Europe was very mild. The indications are that this winter is going to be much colder. So I have to say, I don't think that reduction is possible unless the German government does what most people, I think, who look at this think it will have to do, which is introduce some form of energy rationing. That would be devastating to German industry, because it'll be the German industrial companies that will have to face the brunt of that energy rationing. And already you're hearing stories that they're starting to close factories, and in many cases that they're thinking of relocating their production. And there's some reports that they're thinking of relocating their production to the place where energy is cheaper, which is, of course, the United States.
Why won't Germany, if Russia does indeed make an offer to fix Nord Stream, shouldn't Germany take that offer?
Well, of course it should.
They won't. We know they won't.
It won't. No, of course they don't. They won't do it because, of course, if they do that, they're reversing their entire position on the sanctions, on the economic war. I mean, they would be effectively admitting defeat. And the political leaders who've nailed their colors to the mast on this, Olaf Scholz, Annalena Baerbock, Robert Habeck, I mean, they would not survive a defeat of that kind. So what they're going to do, I think, is that they're going to grind on. And unless, of course, there's a major crash. I mean, we're talking about a slow process at the moment of things getting worse. Of course, if it starts to turn bad rapidly, if we start to see big German companies starting to close production and Germans losing jobs and, companies relocating to the United States and that kind of thing. Unless something like that happens, they will grind on. If something like that happens, then I think we will see a political crisis, though it's difficult to know how that crisis will resolve itself, given that all the major political leaders of all the mainstream parties in Germany, which realistically are the only ones that will form a new government, are equally committed to this policy. Friedrich Merz and the CDU, CSU, as much as Christian Lindner of the Free Democrats is the finance minister, and the Social Democrats, and of course the Greens. So, I mean, unless they start looking for alternatives to the left and the right, with Die Linke and the AfD, which politically is very difficult, I think that any new government that might be formed in Germany could very well turn out to be the same as the old government.
Right. Okay. So final question is Ursula von der Leyen. She was in Sofia, Bulgaria, and it was this big event to welcome the latest pipeline addition into the European Union, and that is the pipeline interconnector between Greece and Bulgaria. This is coming from Azerbaijan, this gas. It's going to add another 3 BCM to the pipeline network of Europe, of the European Union. You have the Baltic Pipe a week ago, which was also inaugurated. That's going to add around, I think it was, 10 BCM or 5 BCM?
That's right, 10 BCM.
Was it 10? Okay, 10 BCM, and that's going to come from Norway to Poland. Van der Leyen said that they are solving their dependence on Russian gas, and it looks like the strategy now may be creating these types of interconnectors and alternative gas pipelines, I guess you could call them. But my question to you is, where do you get the gas from then? I mean, obviously you have to build these interconnectors as well, but where do you get the original supply from? If you're the European Union, can Azerbaijan pick up the slack? Is this pipe, this fiction, this dream of the East Med, is that going to solve it? Is there another source that we don't know about? We also have the Yamal pipeline, which has also kind of been manipulated to fix some gas issues as well. But where do you find the gas?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, these are. I'm not going to say they're insignificant quantities, but they are marginal quantities compared to what the Russian pipeline system was providing. I mean, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, taken together, would have provided 120 billion BCM. I mean, it would have been on a completely different scale to these small interconnector pipelines and the new Baltic pipeline from Norway. And of course, the other problem is that liquefied natural gas, it's not coming in anything like the quantities that I think some people in Europe deluded themselves it would come. Olaf Scholz went to Qatar. He was able to find one tanker with liquefied natural gas from Qatar that was going to come. They all relied heavily on the US. But of course, the US did provide quite a lot of LNG in the summer and the late early autumn. But the problem there is that the US needs LNG itself, and it supplied so much to Europe that it is starting to run short of LNG. And most LNG now, from this point on, stays in the US. The point to understand is that the entire gas industry, the entire global gas market, was predicated on the assumption that Europe would receive most of its gas in the form of pipeline gas, and that much of it would come from Russia. 40% of it, perhaps actually more than that, would come from Russia. You just can't fill up that huge gap in the market. Every industry insider, every technical expert, before the sanctions were imposed, came along and said this is already a tight market. We haven't even seen yet competition starting to take off from the Asians. I mean, if the East Asians, if the Chinese, for example, start to ramp up purchases of LNG, as they did last year, and that could easily happen because the Chinese government now seems to be in the process of reflating the Chinese economy. So you could start to see Chinese demand for oil and LNG grow. Then, of course, that's going to reduce available amounts of LNG even further at a time when the US is concerned about replenishing its own stocks. So where does that leave Europe? I mean, you can build, as you said, all the pipelines you want, but if you don't have the gas to put in them, what good is that going to do for you? And besides, building pipelines takes time, building LNG terminals takes time, setting up all the infrastructure takes time. We now have another wild card, because you started this program by talking about the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. What's if you start going down that road, if you start sabotaging pipelines, what's to prevent you sabotaging LNG terminals? And LNG tankers, by the way, are unbelievably vulnerable. Exactly. Somebody suggested, I mean, I read somewhere, I think it was on Zero Hedge, that, you know, they're floating Hindenburgs, you know, that airship that blew up in, I think it was New York, anyway, in the United States back just before the war. So, I mean, you know, this whole thing now looks incredibly precarious, clearly not thought through, clearly not planned, and getting worse by the day and by the hour.
Okay, so if you're taking gas, if you're bringing gas in from Azerbaijan, why can't that gas line be sabotaged? Right?
Yeah.
Ukraine's gas transit.
Yeah.
What kind of shape is that in? And Ukraine is actually they've actually sabotaged their own gas pipeline, and back in like April, they actually turned it off. I think the gas or the oil, the druzhba. So they actually, you know, played around with their own supply with their own transit of gas and oil. And what about Turkstream? You know, what's to prevent Turkstream from going offline? There was a report from Radio Free Europe a couple of days ago, which said that there's some whispers about something happening to Turkstream, and not only that, but the Dutch authorities, they've revoked the license because of sanctions as well. You know, you're kind of getting like a repeat of the Nord Stream turbine scenario in a way. It seems like the trajectory of things are to completely sever any possibility of Europe getting any gas from anywhere else outside of U.S. LNG. I mean, I think that's where we're heading.
Absolutely, that's exactly.
I've even heard, Alexander, just real quick, aside from gas, I've even heard various analysts saying that sooner or later, the EU, under the direction of the U.S., and this is not gas related, but I'm going to throw it out there as well, is going to move to block the Russia's access to the Baltic Sea as well. They're going to actually perhaps float that out there as well. I mean, this is where we're heading.
Absolutely. I mean, there's talk about intercepting tankers with Russian oil. That's extraordinary. That that we won't prevent Russian oil coming to Europe by actually intercepting tankers. But no, I've heard this. This is absolutely correct, that they might try and close down access to Russian shipping through the Baltic Sea, not just tankers, by the way, but everything. Close the Danish Straits, by the way, completely illegal. But anyway, who knows? They might start doing these sort of things. The Russians, by the way, just for information's sake, have been building up ports in the Far East. Their biggest ports now are in the Far East, so that might be what they will do instead. And I doubt that they can stop them sending ships through the straits, the Turkish Straits as well. But anyway, let's all get down that. But you're absolutely right. That does seem to be the plan. But LNG is expensive, more expensive than pipeline gas. It's technologically more complex. The infrastructure is more fragile. I mean, it is. There's more interconnections. There's terminals. You have to move things around. It's a much more complex technology altogether. The cost, the pricing cost for all this gas in Europe is going to be very, very high. And of course, you're going to be moving trundling all these, big tanks of gas around, liquefied gas around. at a time of increasing tensions, in geopolitical tensions with the Russians. Now, what the Russians will want to do, I have absolutely no idea. But I agree, that is where we're heading. And the entire European and German specifically industrial model has been constructed around cheap pipeline gas from Russia. It's going to be very difficult to turn that round in anything like the necessary times period. I mean, you know, we're talking about big industrial companies, even medium-sized industrial companies. This is a very, very difficult thing to fix. And I have to say, there's more and more talk of deindustrialization in Europe. And I think that's what's coming. I think we're going to see a Germany going the same way as Britain did in the 70s and 80s, going from being an industrial country to becoming a country that relies mainly on services, doesn't have the huge financial sector that Britain does, and besides, it will create a fundamental difference, a complete transformation in German society and in the way in which Germans think of their country. I mean, if it is no longer a manufacturing hub, it'll be a completely different place. And what the whole of the European Union will be like without that manufacturing hub, the German manufacturing hub at its center, it's difficult to really say.
I'm just trying to figure out what kind of services is Germany.
Well, what indeed? I mean,
the UK makes a little. Okay, you have the City of London. You have the English language.
Yeah,
I can see various international services being anchored in the UK. I'm not saying the deindustrialization of the UK was a good thing, but you could say, okay, there are certain advantages that Britain has over all the countries in Europe with regards to providing service types of businesses, whether it's in technology or customer service or anything. I mean, there just are certain advantages. Even the distance from London to New York is an advantage. You know, 6-hour flights, you're there. Germany, I'm just trying to figure out what services are going to be provided out of Germany that are going to make up for the manufacturing and the industry.
I don't know. And I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. I don't know that there is an answer to that question. I mean, they'll just have to think of something is all I can say. I mean, all I will say is the Germans themselves, it's extraordinary to watch this as it's happened. I mean, I was listening to an interview, a television interview of a German industrialist. He's in the textile industry. And he was trying to explain all the problems to the interviewers and the panel, and they were all incredulous. It was as if he was telling them things that they simply couldn't really compute or understand, because this is such a vast change that's coming over Germany that I don't think they really understand how to deal with this. Germany has been very successful economically on the strength of its manufacturing industry for such a long time that I think one of the problems is that German society simply can't imagine a situation where it no longer is successful in that kind of way. And if and when it happens, and it will happen suddenly, it will come as a shock and it will cause great anger. But of course, by that point, it might be too late to reverse things.
All right, we will leave it there. theduran.locals.com and go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.